Okay, hello and welcome to today's Doors Open Baltimore presentation presented by the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. My name is Nathan Denny's and I'm the Associate Director of the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. First, I want to thank everyone who donated to be with us. It's through your support that we've been able to have a Doors Open program nearly every day this month, and to our sponsors, grantors, and in-kind supporters. Thank you so much. This year has been crucial for your support. Next, I want to make an announcement for our Instagram photo contest. If you want to be a part of this, what we're asking people to do is take photos of buildings around your neighborhood. And the way you participate is to post your photo on Instagram and use the hashtag DoorsOpenBaltimore. There are prizes available and the contest is going through the end of the month, so there's still time to participate. Today is part of our Arts and Culture Week. And if you're enjoying today's program, I hope you can join us tomorrow evening for a virtual tour of West Mount Vernon Place, one of the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion's neighbors. It should be a really interesting presentation. But today I'm joined by Lisa Keir, who is a past president of the Baltimore Architecture Foundation. And she is also an expert on all things Garrett-Jacobs Mansion. And I'm so happy to have her here to talk about this really interesting building. And if you have questions for Lisa, please enter them into the chat box. And with that, Lisa, take it away.
Thank you, Nathan. Let me share my screen here. Is it there?
Not yet.
Is my screen share showing, Nathan?
Why don't you try that again?
Oh, I figured I might have trouble with that. Let me try it one more time.
There you go.
All righty, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. I'm not real experienced with doing this. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me today for a virtual tour of the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion. I'd much rather be doing this in person than be doing it virtually. We're going to spend half an hour doing a tour that normally takes me about an hour and a half. So we're going to go running through the mansion. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box or save them for the end, and we will answer them as we go along. So we're going to be talking about the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion at 11 West Mount Vernon Place. We start with one wealthy client, Mary Frick Garrett-Jacobs, two talented architects, Stanford White and John Russel Pope, three owners, the Garrett-Jacobs, the Shriners, and the Engineers Club, and four Mount Vernon Place row houses, 7, 9, 11, and 13 West Mount Vernon Place. Here is the familiar brownstone facade that you see stretching for about half a block on the south side of West Mount Vernon Place. On the left is the slide of the portion that was designed by the architect Stanford White. And you can see that it's totally different from the brick neoclassical townhouses that existed before Stanford White on Mount Vernon Place. It has a very strong horizontal line. It has a facade made out of brownstone instead of brick, and it breaks the street wall with that jutting portico that comes out into the sidewalk. Pope's design on the right honors the design that White established, but in a much quieter fashion. So let's go inside. If it were 100 years ago, we'd be able to go inside through these bronze doors that were designed by Stanford White. However, those bronze doors were at some point removed. We were told they were removed by the Shriners. And one day, a lot of us went down in the basement where we had told they were stored, looking behind all the nooks and crannies for the doors, never found them, but we did find lots of other interesting things. So come on inside what was a 40-room mansion with 100 windows, 23 fireplaces. And originally it was the home of Mr. and Mrs. Robert Garrett. In 1872, Robert Garrett married Mary Frick. He was the son of John Moore Garrett, a fabulously wealthy Baltimore businessman. She was the daughter of a very socially prominent family in Baltimore. He was 25, she was 21. His father, John Moore Garrett, gifted them with 11 West Mount Vernon Place as a wedding gift. It was a 10,000 square foot row house located in the most prestigious residential section of Baltimore, and it was fully furnished. While the local newspapers dubbed the mansion Mr. Garrett's Palace, in reality, it was Mrs. Garrett who was the driving force behind the renovations. She lived in the mansion for 62 years. For 30 of those years, it was under construction. Now, I don't want you to think she was living with plaster dust because she had several other homes. She only visited the mansion during the social season, but she had her family's estate in the Catonsville area called Uplands. She had an apartment in New York. There was a cottage in Newport, Rhode Island, and there was also a cottage at Deer Park in Garrett County in Maryland. So she traveled a lot and went to France frequently also. So she would just direct the renovations from afar and then show up to enjoy them. While she was the person whose vision was created the mansion, it was his money that was able to fund all those renovations. And that money came from the B&O Railroad. You may remember that the B&O Railroad was chartered in 1827. And when it was chartered, there was no such thing as a common carrier railroad anywhere in the world. So the B&O had to invent all of the technical equipment, had to create the industry of the B&O Railroad. And of course, lots of other railroads followed in their footsteps, so to speak. At one point, the B&O Railroad was the largest employer in Baltimore. John Moore Garrett was president of the B&O Railroad for 30 years, from 1854 to 1884. And this picture gives you an idea of what a powerful businessman he was. He led the railroad through a huge expansion project, along the way helping the Union win the Civil War. And he was, as you might imagine from looking at the photograph, a very shrewd and ruthless businessman. He died in 1884, and his son, Robert Garrett, became the B&O president. Unlike his ruthless and shrewd father, Robert was more interested in arts and culture than he was in being a ruthless businessman. He was president from 1884 to 1887, and after that, he resigned from the presidency. However, when he became president in 1884, he and his wife determined that in order to entertain in the manner in which a railroad president should entertain, they would buy the adjacent building, number 9 West Mount Vernon Place, and hire the most expensive architect of the day, Stanford White, to put the two buildings together into one huge mansion. Now, Stanford White was a self-taught architect. He was, he'd never been to architecture school, but he did travel to Europe. And while he was in Europe, he learned about all the ways in which architecture could celebrate wealth and power. And he brought those lessons back to the United States. And you can just tell from looking at those mustaches that he thought he was really something. And his clients did too. He was not only a residential architect, but he also designed commercial buildings. This is a slide of a postcard of the Madison Square Garden that he designed for New York City, which preceded the one which now exists in New York City. Also had the distinction of having been murdered in that building by the jealous husband of an actress whom White had seduced. This was a drawing showing White's putting together number 9 and number 11 West Mount Vernon Place. And you can see how different it was from the other buildings that were on the square. The building that is to the west, the gentleman who owned that building sued the Garretts because the portico jutting out into the street, he averred, blocked his light and air. After a lengthy court battle, the Garretts did win, and we enter through that entryway today. As we enter into the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion, we are confronted with the best example of Stanford White's desire to use architecture to express power. This soaring space is filled with both light and, for somehow how he did it, I think it's just incredible. It's got wood paneling on the ceiling, wood paneling on the walls. It's got a wooden stairway, and yet somehow it manages to be a light and glowing space. If you look at this, you'll see that he borrowed architectural design from many different eras, and it all works together beautifully to create a setting for lavish entertainment. The foyer was designed not just to be an entryway to greet guests, it was also designed as a space for entertaining. And it has, if you look at it, paneled walls with carved, all hand-carved on the paneling and hand-carved cornice, as a beautifully hand-carved balustrade. But the signature element is the spiral stairway, which soars 3 floors up to the third level. The spiral stairway is topped by a Tiffany Dome, and this is a tour de force of architectural design. The Tiffany Dome is multi-hued, and when the sun is streaming through there, it casts a glow on the stairway. From the top, you can look down at the stairway. You see no visible means of support as you're looking down for 3 full floors. You might feel a little vertiginous as you're doing that. The foyer also had a inglenook fireplace, which was a very familiar design element at that era, but done here in much grander scale than you would find in most arts and crafts homes. This image is taken from the 2nd floor of the foyer, and it gives you a really good example of how all these decorative elements work together. You can see the coffered ceiling very well here, and to the left of the image is the part of the spiral stairway. But you can see how the balustrade around the top makes a theatrical setting so that people who were there for an entertainment could feel like they were on view. There is a Venetian chandelier. The stained glass windows were designed by Louis Comfort Tiffany. The plain glass window on the lower level, at one point that was replaced when the Tiffany window that had been in there was removed by the Shriners. We've heard that it was removed in order to settle an outstanding bill with a plumber. And so I don't know which plumber had the good taste to say he'd take a Tiffany window, but seems like a good exchange to me. There's a Venetian chandelier hanging there, and the pillars that are on the lower level are sgraffito, which are imitation marble. Was very popular at the time. White also pioneered the idea of architect as interior designer, paid close attention to detail. This Tiffany glass window is got the same style of design as the carved paneling in the room. Also hanging in the foyer is this image of the Great Fire of Baltimore from 1904. It is in recognition that the building now belongs to the Engineering Society of Baltimore, which was formed after the fire to rebuild Baltimore. As we leave White's foyer and go into the next room in what was number 11 West Mount Vernon Place, you see that White's design varies greatly. Here, this room, which we call the Vollmer room, and it was where Mrs. Garrett held her afternoon teas, which was a much sought after society lady invitation. This room is just plain pretty. It is a beautifully designed room. It's oval, painted red, which was Mrs. Garrett's favorite color. And it's got a beautiful, delicate design on the ceiling that was restored by the Engineers Club. It has a small stained glass window with a lovely design of Jason and the Argonauts from classical mythology. On either end of the oval room, there are oval pocket doors, which fold seamlessly back into the oval walls. What a marvel of engineering that is. So the room was just plain pretty. So we've gone from magnificent to pretty. And now the next room in number 11 is one that is historically focused. This is the medieval design that he chose for the Heritage Room. And the way he achieved that was through actually bringing materials from Europe of the 17th century over to the United States and installing them here in the Heritage Room. Across from that fireplace, there is a break front, and both of those pieces are carved with scenes from 16th, 17th century European life. There are lords and ladies and knights. There are angels and fanciful caryatids. There are peasantry at work. I really like the one over here above the fireplace. That if you look closely, you can see that donkey is refusing to pull the cart, and he's being both cajoled and beaten into trying to get him to move, which is a very typical country scene. No expense was spared in creating this room. You have these 17th century Brussels tapestries on the walls that were cut to fit. You have casement windows that have sterling silver hinges on them. There is a safe, a silver safe concealed behind the paneling here. The door, it is closed with this wonderfully detailed combination lock. Even the servants' entries were both tapestried and paneled to give the feeling all around the room of the tapestry and paneling and still allow it to be usable, but you know, servants were meant to be not noticed, and so their entryway was to be not noticed also. So these three rooms are where we still see White's design inside the mansion today. Now, this next slide shows you a image of how White had designed the drawing room. Remember, this design was done after 1884. And the one thing I want you to note from this slide is the marble fireplace and the mirror over the fireplace, because we're going to see those again. In 1884, what we see in the drawing room today was two rooms. This was the front part on the Mount Vernon Place side. In 1887, Robert Garrett resigned as president because of ill health. He'd had a nervous breakdown. And so he and Mary went traveling to Europe. While they were in Europe, his brother, T. Harrison Garrett, who had lived at Evergreen, was killed in a yachting accident. And that was more than Robert Garrett could deal with. And his health declined very rapidly. And for the next 10 years, he was under the care of a personal physician. He died in 1896. His personal physician was Dr. Henry Barton Jacobs. After Mr. Garrett died, Dr. Jacobs became a tuberculosis specialist with the Johns Hopkins Hospital. In 1902, he and Mrs.
Oh no, we seem to have lost Lisa there. I'll see if I can get in touch with her, everyone. I'm sorry, it seems like her connection has just dropped. While we're waiting for her to come back to us here. Yeah, while we're waiting for her to come back to us here, I can't answer one of your questions. Someone was asking about Stanford.
Am I back? Am I back, Nathan?
I was filling the time
Okay.
for you.
Okay, thank you. I'm sitting out here in the boonies of Glendon, and there is a very bad internet connection, and it just bounced me off. Sorry about that.
Why don't you
Okay.
try sharing the screen again?
I need to share my screen again? Okay. All righty. Is it there yet? Is it there, Nathan?
Not yet.
Oh, daggone. Okay. Sorry, folks, just give me a minute here and I'll get back to where I was. Anybody wants to complain about broadband connection in Baltimore County, please do. I'm still trying, Nathan.
Okay. Well, while you're working on that, I had a question here about Stanford White's like prominence in architecture during his time. He's asked if Stanford White was a visionary architect like Brunelleschi, who was the father of Renaissance architecture. And what I would say is a different comparison is that he was sort of like an early version of a starchitect. He became this celebrity architect and was popular in social circles. And there's a great story, or it's a kind of it's a tragic story, but it's also a great story about his death. That like Lisa, you might want to probably do a better job of telling than I could.
Well, he was somebody who was well known as a philanderer, and he, for some reason, he had a penchant for young girls, and he had seduced Eleanor Nesbit when she was, I guess probably late teens. And are we back yet?
You're back, yes.
Okay. And she later married this gentleman by the name of Harry Thaw. And Thaw was somewhat unbalanced. And he was, do you know that story, the girl in the Gilded Cage? That early song? That was apparently a story of their relationship. And so Thaw just shot him in the Madison Square Garden. But apparently White had considered himself quite a society gentleman. So, you know, he was somebody who did whatever he wanted. He was a law unto himself and so on. So I think that to say he was a starchitect was probably right, but he was more about being part of the society that he was designing arts for, architecture for. Does that help?
I think that's a great answer.
Okay. So where did I get kicked off? Was I at this slide with Dr. and Henry Barton Jacobs and Mrs. Jacobs?
Yeah, that's right. You left off talking about those.
Okay. All right. So here we had 1896, Mr. Garrett died. And Mrs. Garrett married Dr. Henry Barton Jacobs in 1902. He had been Mr. Garrett's personal physician for a decade before his death. It was quite an unequal marriage. Mrs. Garrett was a wealthy society lady with all kinds of society aspirations. Dr. Jacobs was a well-respected physician. Apparently they had a prenup, but they continued to live happily together until her death in 1933. In 1902, when they were married, Dr. Jacobs, who was a bibliophile, was gifted by his wife with her having bought the house number 7 West Mount Vernon Place, and hired the architect, John Russel Pope, to add number 7 to numbers 9 and 13 and create an even more lavish mansion. And as part of that, to create a library for her new husband. John Russel Pope was a architect who was much different from Stanford White. He was actually trained in neoclassical architecture, they're called the Beaux-Arts in Paris, had also traveled extensively in Europe, but his aesthetic was totally different. It was much more neoclassical. The facade that he designed and how he made a much more quieter design for adding number 7. He also designed their home in wood, in their cottage in Newport, Rhode Island, called Woodhome. It was on the grounds of the Salve Regina College and it was demolished in the 1960s. Architectural Digest featured this house in one of their early 20th century magazines, and you can see what the drawing room looked like at that time. You notice that the fireplace that White had installed with the mirror above it are shown again here. It's been relocated from the original location and centered in the room. What had been 2 rooms was thrown into 1 room by White, and it was created, it then created very neoclassical design for this room. Here is the room today, and you can see from looking at the room today that the proportions are still there. All of the embellishments are still there, but the reproduction French furniture and all of the Chinese accent pieces are gone. However, White's fireplace is still there, as is the mirror over it, now all surrounded by the very calmly classical design that Pope had installed, complete with the white woodwork, white painted woodwork, paneling, and all of the gilt decoration that went over the paneling. The doorways also were framed in gilt. We still have the original sconces. Several years ago, this room was restored and all of the gilt was redone and the Dutch painting around the doorways was redone so that the room now looks just as splendid as it did when Mrs. Garrett lived there, albeit much less full. This is the copy of the print from the library, from the Architecture Digest. You see that again, like the foyer, it was paneled with wood, and it actually has a much more quiet effect than the paneling in the foyer does. The embellishment is much less exuberant, and the focus of the room is on the bookcases where Dr. Jacobs' collection was housed. This is the library today, and the bookcases have a collection of photographs in it detailing the history of the B&O Railroad. As you leave the library, you enter what's called the Cane Stone Hall. Now I want you to look and notice the wall here is not the plain white wall that you see today in the Cane Stone Hall. Look at the marble floor. That's the cane stone. It was from, it's marble quarried from Caen in Normandy, France, and it's very prized for its blue and brown veining. Behind this curtain, restorationists have discovered the original details of the room walls that you saw in that original slide of the Cane Stone Hall. And at some point, we hope to restore the walls to this original decoration, but you know, that only takes money. Here is John Russell Pope's stairway, and his stairway is much different from Stanford White's. The stairway descends from the Cane Stone Hall to the supper room below. And you see it is got a iron and brass railing on it. The caduceus there is in reference to Dr. Jacobs' medical profession. And it is a much different feeling. We'll see it again in a minute. As we leave the Cane Stone Hall and continue to the back of what was number 7, we enter what Mrs. Garrett called the long gallery that we call today the ballroom. If you look at the photograph carefully, you can see that that image at the back of the stage is the image now hanging in the Baltimore Museum of Art, a portrait of George IV of England in his full regalia. So in case you had any doubt that you were in the presence of Baltimore royalty here, that makes it clear. All of the rest of the paintings here are her old master collection. She willed that to the Baltimore Museum of Art, a very young museum that she had been instrumental in helping to found. And many of these paintings can be found on the walls in their old master gallery today. Pope designed this room with a skylight to allow better viewing of the artworks. He also cleverly used mirror doors to help to reflect the light in the room. There are extravagant details here too. You have a painted frieze, and there's paintings on the ceiling in between the skylight panels. The walls are all clad in what today is polyester fabric. When it was renewed, the fabric was milled in the same factory that had made it in France, but originally it was silk. All of the fabric panels are surrounded by woodwork paneling to frame it. And of course, we have some more gilt mountings there. This room was used for both as an art gallery and also concerts and performances and social events happened there. And after the event was there, the guests could either choose to leave the room and head out to the courtyard. These doors, which are brass and glass and iron, lead you to the courtyard, which in Mrs. Garrett's day was open to the elements, and there was a garden there with beautiful plantings and a conservatory that housed delicate greenery and birds and monkeys and so on. Or instead, you could leave the room and go to the down this stairway that Pope had designed, which is a broad marble stairway with a gentle curve that brought you down to the lower level supper room. And the supper room was designed to be under the ballroom, and it has never been restored and does not need to be restored today. Its marble floors and panels and mirrors and Meissen chandeliers still exist today, as they existed back in Dr. Jacobs and Mrs. Jacobs' day, when they would be able to host a gathering of 80 people for dinner. There'd be a long table set up here in the center of the room between the pillars. And it, of course, was set with the finest china and crystal and silverware that had been plated with gold on top of acres of white linen. This was the musicians' gallery where the musicians could play gently while you were having your dinner. Think of, Downton Abbey opulence. Here is a view of the supper room today, and you can see how sunlight streams into the room, even though it's on a lower level, and it's reflected in the mirrors there to make it a bright and welcoming space during the day. Here are details from the Meissen chandelier showing you the fanciful shepherdesses and flowers that grace the chandelier. These sconces by Meissen also are deployed to light the room at night so that it's also bright and welcoming in the evening. And this musicians gallery was also a stairway that you could exit onto the lower level of the courtyard. Now, Mrs. Garrett wasn't finished because in 1915, she determined that her art collection had outgrown the ability to display it in the ballroom and throughout the mansion. So what did she do? She bought the adjacent building, number 13. And when she bought number 13, she demolished the back of the building and the stables that she was no longer using behind number 11. And she used that area to build an art gallery. And as you can see in this doorway right here leads into the, what was the ballroom. And these doors right on this side led into the courtyard. So you could enter from the courtyard into the art gallery. And the art gallery doors are still there today. The Engineers Club has repurposed the art gallery though. It is now the kitchen for the Engineers Club. So a different kind of art is made there today. So the rest of the story, Mrs. Jacobs died in 1933. She willed a life estate to Dr. Jacobs and he died in 1939. The contents of the mansion were either donated, like the artwork was to the Baltimore Museum of Art, or it was sold at auction after his death. This is the auction catalog, and you can see that it was taking 3 days to sell all of the pieces at the auction. The building itself was purchased at the auction by the Thomas Cook Funeral Home. They were unable to open their business there because of zoning restrictions, however, and they sold the building to the Shriners. The Shriners continued to use the building until 1952. In 1952, Baltimore City decided to demolish the building in order to build an addition to the Walters Art Gallery. There was a bond referendum for this, and what became the Baltimore Heritage Organization led the fight to save the building. The building was not demolished, fortunately, but it fell into disrepair. For 10 years, the building was untenanted until it was rescued by the Engineers Club in 1962. Since 1962, the Engineers Club has been the stewards of the mansion, and they have worked hard to restore the mansion to its former glory. Its charitable arm, the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion Endowment Fund, of which I am a member, has raised over $8 million to restore and refurbish. Projects have included the 2010 Courtyard Edition and the 2018 Tower Edition. All of this bringing us to where we are today, where we'd love to be able to come back and enjoy the mansion yet again. Here's our little promotional video. If anybody wants to donate, we're happy to take your money. And I apologize for my technical problems here, but it does happen. Be happy to answer any questions that people might have. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Lisa. That was a great presentation. You mentioned the Engineers Club as one of the present uses of the building. Can you talk about some of the others? Like I know that there's a opera you can go see at the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion?
Oh, well, those are, we have Garrett-Jacobs Mansion Endowment Fund has the opera there as our resident artist. They actually perform, the Chamber Opera performs there, I think, well, they haven't yet this year, but I know they hope to start again in January, but they regularly perform operas there in the building that are sold out every time. So if anybody's interested, keep your eye on their website.
Great. And what was the size of the staff that ran this massive house?
They had a low of 15 and a high of 24. She had an interior decorator that she hired to do her interior decoration for all of her different buildings and so on. So nothing like having your own private interior decorator.
And can you talk about any noteworthy visitors to the house during the Garrett's ownership?
Oh, I can't drop any names that are ones that are that you'd remember, but suffice it to say that everybody is, you know, who was anybody would have wanted to have an invitation there.
Great. And family question, is Mary Frick related to Henry Clay Frick?
They were, you know, 15th cousins 3 times removed or something like that. They were in the same family, but weren't, you know, weren't kissing cousins by any means.
And a question about Mount Vernon. Is this area of Baltimore still a wealthy section of the city?
Most of the houses in that area now have been turned into condominiums. So what was originally a, say, 10,000 square foot single family house is now probably somewhere between 6 and 8 condominiums in each of the buildings.
Yeah, that's right. There are some people who have gone all out and have recreated some fabulous townhomes in the neighborhood.
The one building that is still a single family house is the one that's sort of the little chateau style house that's on the corner of the park right next to it's Madison Street.
There's a question of, wasn't there a movie filmed at this location some 10 years ago? I'm familiar that 12 Monkeys used the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion. Do you know of any other film?
They did. Well, you know, a lot of the Veep episodes were filmed there at the Garrett-Jacobs Mansion. So that was a big thing. And yes, there is a whole series of films that were filmed there, you know, a scene here or a scene there.
Is the mansion typically open to the public when we're not in a global pandemic?
Yes, it is. The mansion, if you want to go in and tour it, the mansion is a place where a lot of events happen. The Engineers Club, you know, has members use it for weddings and all kinds of events. So if there is no wedding happening, there are also a lot of business meetings that happen there. You can wander through. We also offer tours regularly when there's no pandemic. On Tuesday, one Tuesday a month, we have what we call a taste and tour.
And if someone was visiting from, say, New York, what other things could they find to do in Mount Vernon?
Oh my goodness, there's so much to do in Mount Vernon. It's right next to the Walters Art Museum, so you can visit there. It's half a block from the George Peabody Library, so you can go visit there. The library has been called the most beautiful room in Baltimore, and you don't want to miss that. It's very close to the Maryland Historical Society. Oops, they have a new name right now. Do you remember what it is, Nathan? But anyway, they have a
history and culture.
That's right. So they have a very nice collection of Maryland things there. There It's not far from the Basilica of the Assumption, which is the first Catholic cathedral in the New World. Not very far from the Enoch Pratt Library. Is that enough to give you an idea? There's lots to do in the area.
There's a plethora of things to do there. And besides that, it's just a beautiful neighborhood. You could just go and on a beautiful day, hang out in the park and just enjoy it.
That's right. It's very European feeling.
Did the Garrett family know the Cohn sisters? Were they friendly?
I don't know that they were or weren't. The thing is that everybody in Baltimore knew everybody else in those days because it was fairly small. And the social circles that the Garretts came from were, you know, the really wealthy and the upper echelon of society, and the Cohn sisters would have been there too. So I imagine the answer is yes, but I don't know that for sure.
There's a question about if opera will be performed virtually. I know that they're doing some an open air concert actually this weekend.
So, oh, the chamber opera is? That's wonderful.
Baltimore Concert Opera.
Nice. I don't know that if they're going to be doing anything virtually or not, but they're such a wonderful group. I'm sure they'll figure out some way to continue to perform.
That's right, yeah, and they're called the Baltimore Concert Opera. So if you're interested in learning more about them, you can just Google Baltimore Concert Opera and find some more information. Is the building accessible by wheelchair?
Yes, that was why we built the tower addition. It has a handicapped accessibility elevator in it, so you can just drive up to the back, ring the bell, get the door opened, and people can enter that way in a wheelchair. Great.
And I can ask one more question here before we wrap up. Is there still and I don't know what this word means, so maybe Lisa does, an eggly room on the lower floor?
Yes, I know what that means, but I don't know the answer to it. I assume so. You know, on the lower floor, Nathan, there are a bunch of rooms there that are used by businesses for, and some of them are sponsored by different organizations, and Eggly was one of them. So I don't know the answer to the question, though.
Okay, well, you might know this one. Who is a landscape architect that designed the Mount Vernon Place?
Well, there's the current design was done by Keir and Hastings, which was done in the 1920s. And prior to that, it was done by the Olmsted brothers. So that the slide I showed you that had the drawing with the park in front of it was the Olmsted brothers design.
Great. Well, I think that wraps up questions for today. And Lisa, thank you for tuning in with us. And I'm happy that your internet connection held up in the end. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. I apologize for that, but nothing I can do about it. So thank you all for joining me, and I hope to see you sometime in the future in person.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.